Here we go. From the Silver Creek Studios, I'm Jared, and this is a pinch hit episode of the BFIBs Almanac. What I like to do on these pinch hit episodes is reminisce a little bit and look back at former teams, former eras, previous championships, whatever the case may be, and kind of get away from some of the stat-heavy information that we get into on the full episode. So, before we get into that, I'd like to invite you to get a hold of the show on Instagram or Twitter at BFIBs Almanac. You can email us at bfibsalmanac@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube, BFIBs Almanac Podcast. And please write in. Send me anything you'd like. Suggestions, criticism, fun tidbits, favorite players. Send me a photo on Instagram, whatever you want. So I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, let's get into it. We got a lot to discuss. On this episode, we're going to talk about the greatest game of all time, the 2011 World Series Game 6. Most of you know all about it, all about the ending, the David Freese walk-off home run, the game-tying triple in the ninth. But there's so much more involved in that game that we're going to talk about why it was the greatest game of all time. So to really kind of set the stage, you really need to look at the greatest night of baseball of all time, which was the final day and game of the regular season, September 28th, 2011. We had, starting it off, was Chris Carpenter throwing a 2-hit complete game shutout with 11 strikeouts to at least give the Cardinals a chance to advance to the playoffs. They needed another victory to happen on the part of the Phillies, but the Cardinals had to take care of business first, and they certainly did with Chris Carpenter's complete game shutout. So as we said, the Phillies were playing the Braves, and the Phillies had already clinched their playoff spot. They had no reason really to play for anything in this final game. They could have pulled all their starters, but they said, we're playing the game the right way. We're going to play it hard through to the end. And they did, and they played the Braves, and they took it into the 13th inning where the Braves finally lost what turned out to be a 10.5 game lead that they held over the Cardinals earlier in the month, and blew that 10.5 game lead, lost the game on the final night to the Phillies, and gave the Cardinals a reason to celebrate with champagne in the locker room. So, again, that's just getting into the beginning of the best night of baseball. The Red Sox and Orioles were playing each other. The Sox were up 3-2 in the bottom of the ninth, and Papelbon blew the save, and the Orioles took the series from the Red Sox. And the Yankees and Rays were playing. The Yankees were up 7-0 going into the 8th inning. By the end of the 8th, they were only up by 1 run, 7-6. And in the bottom of the ninth, down to their last strike, Dan Johnson, a no-name, no-nothing hitter, hit a home run to tie it. And in the bottom of the 12th, Longoria hit a home run to send the Rays to the playoffs. The walk-off hit for the Sox was Andino, was hit at 11:02 Central, and at 11:05 Central, Longoria hit his walk-off home run. Fans were flipping back and forth between both games as they were going off. As soon as the Andino walk-off happened, fans flipped over to watch Longoria hit one. It was just this crazy extra inning night of baseball that allowed these teams to get into the playoffs, knocked out the other teams, had all kinds of implications. It was great. It's a tremendous night. And then, of course, in the first round, again, the Cardinals and Phillies, who, again, did us a favor by beating the Braves, we had that epic Game 5 matchup between Chris Carpenter and Roy Halladay. It ended up being a 1-0 shutout, and the Cardinals moved on to the NLCS, which, again, was exciting. Lots of home runs hit. Great baseball. David Freese, NLCS MVP, leading us into the World Series. against the Texas Rangers, who had never won a World Series, had gone the previous year in 2010, had lost that series. They were back, kind of had, destiny on their side, a lot of people thought. So that whole series was set up with, the Cardinals shooting for their 11th World Series, their 11th championship, the Rangers trying to get their very first. And here we were in Game 6 with the Cardinals down 3-2 in games, and an elimination game. They lose this, the series is over, Rangers win it all. Going into this game, Albert Pujols, our stud hitter, had only had hits in Game 3. Now that was the series or the game where he had 3 home runs. This epic night, joining Babe Ruth and Reggie Jackson as the only players to ever hit 3 home runs in a World Series game. But other than that game, he had no hits in the series. And even in this game, Pujols was 0 for 4 going into the 9th. So I mentioned this was the greatest game of all time, but it was setting up to be the worst game of all time for Cardinal fans. It was such a sloppy game. Our starting pitcher only lasted 3 innings. He only gave up 2 runs, but La Russa pulled him after 3, which was a clean inning, actually. But matchups and what he saw from him, he needed to go to the pen. But we had 3 errors by the Cardinals. In the 4th inning, Holiday dropped a fly ball in left. He should have called off shortstop. He didn't. They both kind of bumped into each other. Holiday dropped it. And then later in that same inning, on a bunt, the pitcher, Fernando Salas, turned to fire to second, and he threw it into center field. And then the inning right after that was the one where David Freese dropped a pop fly on the infield. It was so frustrating. As a fan, I was just so angry. I was ready to turn the game off. I'm sure a lot of other fans were, walking away from their TVs. And I can't imagine being in the stadium, how frustrating that would have been on a cold night. But on the flip side, the Rangers didn't do themselves any favors either with their defense. Michael Young at first base committed 2 errors. He had one where he fielded the ball, kind of bobbled it, and tried to reach for the bag and missed, and Holiday was safe. He had another one where he fielded it and flipped and threw to the pitcher who was covering and threw it out in front of him. The pitcher couldn't get his foot down in time. Runner was safe. There was even another, what probably should have been an error, but I don't believe it was, where Holiday was sliding into second and took out the shortstop who was throwing and threw it away. It wasn't ruled an error. It was just a play not made. So both teams were playing sloppy defense, and these were all plays that led to runs, back and forth score. The Rangers took the lead in the first. The Cardinals took it back in the bottom of the first. Rangers tied it up in the second, took the lead in the fourth. We tied it up in the fourth. In the top of the fifth, the Rangers took the lead again. We tied it up in the sixth. In the seventh was when Lance Lynn came in. You had back-to-back home runs by Beltre and Cruz. And then later in that inning, Kinsler hit an RBI to make it 7-4 in the 7th inning. And worse yet, the Cardinals didn't even bounce back in the 7th. So after 7 complete innings, we were down by 3. Now in the bottom of the 8th, Alan Craig got us back in it with a home run to make it 7-5 and give us life. 2-run game. And then later on in the 9th inning, which is, of course, when some of the magic happened, we had Albert Pujols, finally, who was 0 for 4 in this game, gets on base with a double in what a lot of people were thinking might have been his last at-bat ever as a Cardinal. And Lance Berkman promptly walked after that, putting 2 men on. And after an out, Freese comes to the plate. He gets down to his last strike and lines one into right field over the head of Cruz, off the wall, knocking in both runs to tie the game at 7-7. So already one of the most amazing games, up and down, back and forth, so frustrating in one sense with poor defense by both sides. so, elating with the offense back and forth, tying the game, taking the lead, losing the lead, gaining it again, tying in the bottom of the ninth with us down to our last strike. The Rangers were ready to celebrate and run onto the field. But it was not done yet. We had in the 10th inning with Jason Mott pitching, our reliable closer at the time, comes in, and Josh Hamilton, who had been injured with a groin injury, had not hit a home run in the World Series yet, hit a 2-run homer, crushed the hearts of Cardinal fans. 10th inning, 2-run homer to give the Rangers the lead. But the Cardinals battled back in the bottom of the 10th. Ryan Theriot had an RBI to make it 9-8 Rangers. And then, of course, Berkman comes up again, who had been in that series our most reliable hitter, and in what seemed like a deep no doubles defense, which didn't need to be played that way, leaving the outfield gaps huge. Berkman laces one into right center to tie the game 9-9 in the 10th, setting us up for the epic bottom of the 11th. David Freese leading off, and actually worked the count to 3-0 before taking a pitch and then lacing a home run to straightaway center for one of the most epic walk-offs we'll ever see. "We'll see you tomorrow night," Joe Buck said. So, amazing game, up and down. I remember jumping up in my chair in my living room, hands raised in the air. And actually, I had turned the game off earlier after all those the errors and the home runs where we were down. And I was so frustrated, so mad, I couldn't stand to watch any more of it. And I walked out of the room, shut the game off. And after a little while, I thought, I need to watch the rest of this game. My wife convinced me, you're going to be upset if you don't finish it. Even if they lose, you need to watch. It's the World Series. She was right. I turned it back on. And I remember my daughter at the time was about 7 or 8 years old, was sitting on my lap. And she could kind of tell as that ninth inning was unfolding that I was very tense and nervous, but excited. And she just had this feeling like, I think I better get up and not be sitting on his lap. And she hopped off my lap and sat over in a chair. And right after that, Freese hit the triple to tie it. I jumped up out of my chair, hands raised, and she would have gone flying because I had no regard for anybody that was sitting on me. It was an epic night. Best game ever. And, you had all the implications. It was an elimination game for the Cardinals. Win or go home. For the Rangers, they were on the verge of their first World Series, and you had this feeling after the game that even though there was a Game 7, the Cardinals had kind of wrapped it up. They had crushed the spirits of the Rangers and almost sealed the deal in Game 6. Now, of course, they had to go on and take care of business the next night, which they did with Chris Carpenter on the mound, and they wrapped it up, pretty much dominated that game. And you could kind of tell the Rangers felt like they had already lost the series after Game 6. So, exciting, epic night. Too much going on to even wrap up in a 15-minute podcast. But I tried to convey my excitement and let you guys know and reminisce about all the little details that happened in that game. There were so many of them. Pitching changes, pinch hits. The Cardinals ran out of position players. The Rangers ran out of position players. We had pitchers bunting. We had lefties facing their left-handed relievers because we didn't have anybody else to put in the game, and they both got hits. Jay and Descalso in the 10th. It was just this crazy game with crazy strategy and crazy implications. So much pressure on everyone, and the Cardinals came out ahead. And we all love David Freese and Lance Berkman for it. So I hope you enjoyed this little recap of the greatest game of all time. Let me know what your thoughts are, what you reminisce about in that series or any other series. get a hold of me at BFIBs Almanac on Twitter and Instagram. And until next time, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac.